let's go. Today we are seeing the luckiest people. Yeah, whatever. Let's just dive into it. Let's go.
It was Christmas Eve, 1971. 17-year-old Julianne Kopke and her mother Maria Kopke excitedly boarded Lanza Flight 508. They were flying from the city of Lima, Peru to spend Christmas with Julianne's father in
What country is
Penguana,
that?
a biological research center in the rainforest where the family lived.
Okay.
It would be a short flight, a little over an hour if they were lucky. But they weren't lucky.
This is something I just noticed. It seems there's CCTV camera inside the airplane. That's supposed to be illegal. That's actually supposed to be illegal. It's illegal to have a CCTV camera in the airplane. I don't know why. Like there's a CCTV camera, and you can obviously see here that this guy is trolling everyone because he's the one planting the cameras. So that's why it's giving the signal that there is no sign, like camera isn't allowed.
Far from it. Midway through the flight, with no warning, the plane broke apart.
Oof.
Julianne was thrown out and suddenly found herself free-falling some 10,000 feet. How would she survive this colossal fall?
That's fire,
what
bro.
had caused the plane to break apart mid-flight? If
That's
you want answers
fire,
to these
bro.
questions and more, then stay tuned as we explore this unbelievable story of survival against all odds, and many more like it.
I'm here. Give me everything. I want to know.
The day before her fateful flight, Julianne and her mother had attended her graduation ceremony from high school in Lima, Peru. They had originally planned to fly home on the 20th of December, but decided to stay a few extra days to attend the ceremony. A fatal mistake. If Julianne and her mother had flown on the 20th as planned, then they would have avoided flying with Lanza, a notoriously shady airline. In the previous 5 years, 2 of their planes had crashed due to pilot errors. They were so distrusted, Julianne's father warned his wife against flying with Lanza. On Christmas Eve, all other flights were booked,
I thought the country they were
leaving
heading
them
to
with
was
no
named
other
Lanza.
choice if they wanted to make it home in time for Christmas. Flight 508 had a scheduled stop at Pucallpa, where Julianne and her mother planned to depart and make the rest of their journey home by car. The flight's planned final destination was Iquitos, and it took off without incident with all 86 passengers and 6 crews safely on board. The plane steadily climbed to a height of 21,000 feet, a little under 4 miles above sea level, when all of a sudden the cabin began to rock. A major thunderstorm had formed ahead of them, causing severe turbulence to jolt the plane. Despite the danger, the flight crew decided to continue the journey as they were under pressure to meet the Christmas holiday schedule. So despite the turbulence, they continued on. Inside the cabin, the shaking got so bad luggage came crashing down from the overhead lockers and air stewards could barely stand. This plane was not built to handle extreme weather at all. Later investigations found it was assembled entirely from spare parts of other planes. A literal patchwork plane. And this underlying weakness in the plane's construction proved deadly when it was struck by lightning, ripping the second-hand fuselage apart. The damage sent the plane into a deadly nosedive and it began to break up as it fell through the sky. Julianne, strapped in her seat, looked out her window and actually saw the bright flash of the lightning by the plane's engine. She felt the horrifying lurch of the plane suddenly entering a nosedive. The plane fell for what felt like an eternity, but as the fuselage tore itself apart, she was suddenly ripped out of the plane. Still strapped into her seat and now free falling from a height of around 10,000 feet, a little under 2 miles, Julianne knew she wouldn't survive. After all, falling from a height of just 6 feet can be deadly for a human, let alone 10,000. And without a parachute, Julianne would be free falling at terminal velocity, which is the maximum speed a falling object eventually reaches when air resistance becomes equal and opposite to the downward force of gravity pulling it to the earth. Terminal velocity for a human being free falling in a stomach-to-earth position is 120 miles per hour. To hit the ground at such speed would be a painful end, to say the least. Julianne was
How many
doomed.
days did it take her to fall down?
That was the last thought that passed through her head before she lost consciousness and descended towards the rainforest canopy. And then Julianne woke up. She was on the ground beneath the canopy, still strapped in her seat. She'd survived the unthinkable.
Wow.
She did have a broken collarbone, a deep gash on her arm, cuts to her legs, and a concussion.
Wow.
But she was still somehow in one piece. How did she do it? Well, Julianne was strapped into the middle seat of a row of 3, which was ripped out as a unit. The 2 empty seats on either side of her acted like a makeshift parachute by increasing the air resistance and slowing her fall.
So she was flying.
Additionally, Julianne actually fell through the thunderstorm that destroyed the plane. The updraft effect of the storm, where a current of warm rising air is drawn up into the storm clouds, slowed her descent. Though, most importantly, Julianne's fall was broken up. Instead of crashing straight into the ground, she was caught in the rainforest canopy. With trees towering between 20 to 130 feet tall, the chairs had caught on and snapped off layers of tree branches as they fell, crucially slowing Julianne's descent before she hit the ground. Whoa! However, she wasn't out of the woods, or in this case, rainforest yet. She was all alone. She was injured, she had no idea where she was, and she lost her glasses in the fall. Being short-sighted, searching her surroundings for other survivors was going to be incredibly difficult.
Wow, she's blind.
Although she wasn't completely alone. The Peruvian rainforest is home to plenty of...
But this is a problem about these new generations, right? If you ain't stupid, why were they recording her? Why were they videoing her? Go out and help her, rescue her. Why were they making a video of her? Oh my god, bro.
creatures such as jaguars, carnivorous masters of stealth which can sprint up to 50 miles per hour and jump up to 10 feet high, and poison dart frogs, which are difficult to spot, though some of them are so poisonous that a single touch can transfer enough poison to kill 10 men.
Damn.
How was Julianne possibly going to survive without accidentally stepping on a poison frog or becoming a jaguar's lunch?
Damn.
Well, unlike you or me, who would be dead meat in seconds, Julianne had one serious advantage. She'd been raised in the rainforest thanks to her upbringing in the Panguana research station. And during her time there, she'd learned some survival skills. So having lost one shoe in the crash, she used her remaining shoe to test the ground ahead of her, knowing some snake species camouflage themselves as dry leaves. Luckily, she managed to avoid running into any snakes or other rainforest beasts and eventually found a small creek. She hopped in and continued walking, since walking in the water avoided stepping on anything sinister on the forest floor. And one good rule for self-rescue when lost in the wilderness is to follow water downhill, as a water source often leads to a human settlement. Julianne trekked through the stream for 3 days. On the 4th day, she stumbled across something. It was debris from the broken up plane. She searched through the wreckage, discovering a bag of sweets that became her first meal in days. But she didn't manage to locate any other survivors, so she kept following the stream. The days in the jungle were hot and
Even if she
clammy,
located
but
any
at night it was cold, and all she was wearing was a short sleeveless mini dress. Nevertheless, she did her best to keep herself warm and pushed through night after night. By the 10th day of her journey, the sweets were long gone. She was weak from starvation, and the wound on her arm had festered, with maggots finding their way in. It was at this point she discovered the stream became part of a larger river, and that's when she saw something that gave her hope.
Fish?
An empty boat. At first, she thought she was hallucinating, because she had yet to meet another human so deep in the wilderness. But then, when she touched the boat, she confirmed it was real, which meant other people were nearby. Julianne looked around and discovered a small path leading further into the jungle. She followed it to a small hut with a palm leaf roof. Inside, she found a liter of gasoline. Might not sound all that useful,
everyone at home already,
she remembered her father had once poured kerosene on a infected wound to remove maggots. And so she poured it on her own maggot-infested arm. It was agony. The maggots desperately tried to escape by burrowing further into her arm, but Julianne successfully removed 30 of them. Now, usually I'd advocate against pouring gasoline onto an open wound. It's incredibly dangerous, as prolonged exposure of gasoline to the skin can cause chemical burns. But Julianne had no other option, and this rudimentary first aid more than likely helped save her life from infection. Even so, if you ever find maggots wriggling in a wound, your first stop should be the hospital, not the gas station. Julianne spent the night in the hut, and the next day she heard voices. The fishermen that used the hut had returned. At first, they were stunned to find this strange girl, but after hearing her story, they gave her proper first aid and transported her to a more inhabited area.
Wow.
Finally, after 11 days lost in the jungle,
Wow.
Julianne was airlifted to the hospital and reunited with her father. Now, you might be thinking, I bet I could have survived 11 days in the rainforest after falling
why
out
were
of
they
a plane.
recording now,
No problem. Well, brace yourself, because 14 other passengers were later discovered to have survived the initial crash, including, tragically, Julianne's mother, Maria.
Wow.
Her injuries were sadly too severe, and she succumbed to them before she could be rescued.
Wow.
Maria's body was discovered on the 12th of January, 1972, and later put to rest.
Wow.
Many of the other survivors were also badly injured, but even those that weren't didn't survive the many hidden dangers of the forest.
Wow, so they were
Still
fighting
think
snakes.
you could have survived?
Nah,
Following
nah,
her perilous
nah, I
journey,
don't think I would have
Julianne
been able
returned
to
to
do.
her parents' native homeland of Germany, where she fully recovered from her injuries.
Wow.
However, even Julianne's rainforest ordeal didn't dampen her enthusiasm for the jungle. She went on to receive a PhD from the University of Munich and returned to Peru to conduct research in mammalogy, specializing in bats. And in 2000, following the death of her father, she took over as the director of the Panguana Research Center.
I was
Turns
crashing
out
from
that
a
you can
plane
rescue
affected
Julianne from the
bats,
jungle,
though. What the
but you
fuck?
can't take the jungle away from Julianne.
Yeah.
Now, Julianne isn't the only person who has gone through an impossibly dangerous situation and lived to tell the tale. There are so many other incredible survival stories out there, but before we get to those, why not hit those like and subscribe buttons
Let's
down
do it.
below?
Let's do it.
All done? Great.
Yeah.
Now let's meet some more unbelievable survivors who defied the
Wow.
odds.
That's crazy work right there.
Brain Scrambler. We've all had to deal with a headache at work. Maybe the photocopier stopped working, or the aircon broke, or Derek from finance just won't get off your back. But none of us have had a headache on the job that was as bad as theoretical physicist Anatoly Bogorsky's. You may think physicists just spend their time looking at whiteboards and arguing over comic books. No, wait, that's the Big Bang Theory. Well, in reality, it turns out that theoretical physics can be a whole lot more dangerous. Anatoly was working as a researcher at the Institute for High Energy Physics in Prodvino, Russia, back in 1978. On the 13th of July, he was checking a malfunctioning piece of equipment inside the Institute's particle accelerator. These complex devices fire elementary particles such as protons at very high speeds to produce beams of charged particles that physicists can
What
study.
language is this, though?
It's important to note that the proton beam itself contains a vast amount of radioactive energy. And I'm sure you all know that anything highly radioactive is also deadly.
Nuke? Is
Now,
there a
to
nuke?
examine the faulty piece of equipment in the accelerator, Anatoly had to
I think
stick
it's
his
a
head
nuke.
into the space where the proton beam passes through the accelerator tube. If you just felt yourself shrink away from the screen, your instincts are on point. Because that day it turned out several safety mechanisms had failed, and the machine accidentally activated.
Damn.
At something close to the speed of light, a high-energy proton beam fired through Anatoly's skull. It passed through the back of his head, the lower half of his brain, and out through the left side of his nose, just like a radioactive bullet. Now, for perspective, a lethal dose of radiation for a human is 500 to 600 roentgens. Anatoly's head had received a local dose of 200,000 to 300,000 roentgens.
Damn.
For an even more insane comparison, the worst hit areas from the infamous Chernobyl meltdown only measured in at 20,000
He got
roentgens.
sniped.
Anatoly felt no pain, but he did see a super bright flash.
He got
And then
sniped.
he continued working. There were no immediate physical effects from the incident, and so he thought nothing of it. But he was eventually given away when the left side of his face became so swollen, people struggled to recognize him. He was immediately transported to a clinic in Moscow for doctors to observe his deterioration. It was predicted that given the gigantic dose of radiation he'd been hit with, it was game over for Anatoly. Over the next few days, the skin on the back of his head and the left side of his face peeled away to reveal the path the proton beam had taken.
Damn.
He was monitored closely for further signs of deterioration, but he survived. It
Damn.
seems that because the radiation was focused on a small single path through his body, Instead of being bathed in it like most radioactive fallout victims are, the damage was localized, and thanks to that he survived. Though he didn't escape totally unscathed, the nerves on the left side of his head were completely destroyed, paralyzing that side of his face. He also lost hearing in his left ear, replaced by tinnitus, which is a sort of constant ringing sound.
Wow.
Yet despite having a supercharged radioactive beam literally shot through his brain, his intellectual ability was unchanged, and he even went on to complete his PhD.
Got sniped.
For the first dozen years after the accident, it didn't appear as if he'd suffered any major brain damage other than an occasional mini seizure. These occasionally caused him to blank out of consciousness for several seconds, often leaving him just staring into space. The same way my friends do whenever I tell one of my terrible jokes. Though in later years Anatoly's condition worsened and he has since had 6 larger seizures.
Wow.
The kind of full-body seizure you're likely to have seen in any hospital drama. But even more strangely, the left side of Anatoly's face hasn't aged a day since the accident.
Damn.
When Anatoly frowns, only one half of his forehead wrinkles. You see, wrinkles are caused by the repetitive movement of the facial muscles beneath the skin. When the muscles are frozen, they don't stretch the skin and thus prevent the more noticeable signs of aging, such as smile or frown lines.
Okay.
With half of his youthful looks, Anatoly continued to work at the Institute for High Energy Physics and even held the post of coordinator of physics experiments. No doubt making sure a similar accident never occurred again. Despite his extraordinary survival, Anatoly was forbidden from discussing the accident publicly for over a decade.
Why?
It occurred under the reign of the Soviet Union, when secrecy of nuclear testing was kept closely under wraps to avoid leaking any information to the U.S. and other Western enemies of the time. Twice a year, Anatoly attended a Moscow radiation clinic to be examined, where he also met with other victims of nuclear accidents who were all similarly sworn to secrecy. It was only after the Soviet Union fell in 1991 that Anatoly was freed from his long-held silence. And it's also why I'm able to tell you this incredible story today. Anatoly is now widely known as someone who has literally redefined the physical limits of human beings and our capacity for survival. He is one super tough physicist, but I bet after that workplace accident, he started wearing a lead-lined hard hat. Call the ambulance. What's on your bucket list? Maybe swim with dolphins or travel to every continent? A popular idea on many people's bucket list is to go skydiving.
Yeah, me too.
Given all the crazy stories I've talked about on this channel, you'll never find me jumping out of a perfectly good plane willingly. But none of those stories compare to what happened to the incredibly lucky Joan Leslie Murray. Back in 1999, Joan had recently started her foray into skydiving. On one dive, she decided to try out some new gear when the worst thing that can happen when you're skydiving happened. Her main parachute failed to deploy. From 14,500 feet she plummeted, and it wasn't until she was less than 700 feet from the ground that she managed to open her emergency chute. When she did, she quickly swung out of control and slammed into the ground at a bone-crunching 80 miles per hour. Most of the bones in her right side were crushed. Her fillings flew out on impact, and like it couldn't get any worse, she ended up crashing onto a fire ant mound. Man, how unlucky can one lady get? But this ant-filled landing was actually where her luck changed. The fire ants, angered by their mound's new skylight, swarmed Joan, stinging her over 200 times. Each of their stings secreted a venom that contains the chemical piperidine. This causes a burning sensation and blisters the skin. Though in this case, the stinging shots actually saved Joan as they stimulated her nervous system and kept her heart beating until help arrived.
Oh, shit.
Joan spent 2 weeks in a coma following the accident, but after 20 constructive surgeries and 17 blood transfusions, she was released from the hospital 6 weeks later and went on to make a full recovery. Now, you'd think this would have put Joan off skydiving for life, right?
Yeah.
Well, unbelievably, she went skydiving again only 2 years later. Move over, Taylor Swift. Turns out Joan here is the real anti-hero.
Yeah, I know, right?
Go with the float. There comes a time in a man's life when he feels lost or unfulfilled. and inevitably makes a bunch of terrible decisions. Classically known as the midlife crisis, it's the time where some men buy a sports car they can't really afford or get a giant phoenix tattoo on their back. I'm looking at you, Ben Affleck. But in the case of one Dougal Robertson, a former British Navy sailor turned dairy farmer, he decided to take his whole family along on his midlife crisis.
Damn.
On January 27, 1971, Dougal, his wife, and their 4 children set out onto the ocean in a schooner, a 43-foot-long sailing boat. Dougal thought that a boat trip around the world would teach his kids some invaluable life lessons, and so the family spent 17 months at sea, sailing from port to port and seeing the world.
17 months. How long is that? Four years. 4 years. Continue.
But it wasn't all plain sailing. On June 15, 1972, the family encountered a group of killer whales off the coast of the Galapagos Islands.
Nice.
Orcas in the wild aren't typically known to attack humans, but perhaps this pod disagreed with Dougal's parenting ideas, or more likely they mistook the boat for whale-like prey and attacked.
Yeah,
They bashed the ship and splintered it into pieces. With the schooner rapidly taking on water, the Robertson family were forced to abandon it for a lifeboat and a small dinghy, scrambling to collect as much food as they could. But after just 6 days, the food ran out. The family were forced into survival mode to stay alive. They caught rainwater in containers to drink, but when they ran out of fresh water, they turned to even more drastic measures, drinking turtle blood. While it is possible to stave off dehydration with blood, drinking it can result in hemochromatosis, where the body absorbs too much iron, which eventually damages your internal organs. Still, it's preferable to drinking seawater, the salt content of which dangerously dehydrates you. Turtles became the family's main food supply, as they were able to hunt them for meat and melt the fat in the sun to create oil to rub on their skin to keep warm. For a staggering 38 days, the Robertson family were lost at sea.
Damn!
They managed to survive long enough to eventually be discovered by a Japanese fishing trawler on July 23rd. The family was rescued, and they returned to land. Though it was definitely an adventure none of them forgot. I bet the next time Dougal suggested a family road trip, everyone was suddenly very busy.
Damn!
Well, hello there. We've all got a good holiday story.
Crazy.
Nothing beats
That's
Julie and
really
Liz's
crazy
whale
story.
of a tale. In November
How do
2020,
you
Julie
manage to
McSorley
catch
and Liz
the turtle?
Cottrell
Like,
were
does
kayaking in
turtle,
San
like,
Luis
swim up to
Obispo,
the surface of the
California.
water? I
The
thought they
ocean
always
just off the
stays
shore
down.
was packed that day with both tourists and marine creatures alike because humpback whales were feeding on the fish in the bay. For whale watching, it's recommended that you keep at least 300 feet away, roughly the length of a football field. However, Julie and Liz had misjudged the distance.
Yeah, of course.
As a result, a tightly packed swarm of fish, known as a bait ball,
Of course,
swam
they're
extremely
always going
close to
to
their
misjudge. They're always
kayaks.
going to misjudge.
Julie and Liz should have taken this as a warning to get out of the way, but it was too late.
No.
It took a few moments, but suddenly they realized they were trapped inside a humpback whale's mouth. Were they about to be swallowed whole? An adult humpback whale can grow to a length of 56 feet and weigh up to 44 tons. At that long, it'd reach end to end of a standard bowling lane, and it's over 20 times the weight of an average car. In a gigantic beast this size, there'd be plenty of room in its stomach for Julie and Liz. However, contrary to its enormous size, these whales have tiny throats. A humpback's throat is roughly the size of a human fist and can only stretch 15 inches in diameter to accommodate a larger meal. You see, a humpback is a baleen whale, which means instead of having teeth, they have bristle-like baleen that acts like a sieve at the front of their mouths. The humpback feeds by scooping up a huge volume of water and fish at once, then pushes the water back out through their baleen filter and swallows the fish whole. The natural instinct of a whale is to spit out anything they can swallow. And this whale was just as surprised as Julie and Liz when it accidentally swallowed them, so luckily it quickly spat them both back out. They were dumped back into the water harmlessly with no injuries at all. Don't be fooled, though, into thinking it's safe to jump into any old whale's mouth. If Julie and Liz had accidentally run into a sperm whale, then this story could have ended a whole lot worse. Sperm whales are toothed whales and are the only species with throats large enough to fully swallow a human. The 65-foot-long marine mammals have large throats to feed on larger prey such as giant squid, which they sometimes swallow whole. In fact, a colossal squid which can reach 46 feet long has been found fully intact inside a sperm whale's stomach before.
What the fuck?
But don't worry about accidentally becoming a sperm whale's toothpick when you're out surfing. It's highly unlikely you'll ever run into one. These whales prefer to live in the open ocean, regularly diving to depths of over 10,000 feet to hunt for squid. So unless you're cruising around in a submarine, it's unlikely you'll bump into any sperm whales anytime soon. Not that whales want to run into you either. They much prefer to hang out by themselves and listen to podcasts.
Yeah. Where's listening to
Podcast?
music?
Well,
That was
I'll
crazy
see
work.
myself out for that one.
Yeah, that was crazy work.
Which of these stories?
Damn. Nah, that was yeah. I've had enough today, bro. Crazy for real.